Chapter 3, Part 2, Classical Greek Civilization, the Hellenic Age. The Greek temple was a symbol of religion and of architecture in classical Greek. The Parthenon, which was built about 447 BCE and dedicated to Athena, gives us a lot of the architectural structures that we remember about Greece, including a post and lintel form, decorations of vertical columns and horizontal beams, styles of columns, enclosed inner rooms, and refinements. When work began on the Parthenon in 447 BCE, the Athenian Empire was at the height of its power. Working on the temple continued until 432, and the Parthenon then represents the tangible and visible influence of Athenian imperial power, unencumbered by the depredations of the Peloponnesian War. Likewise, it symbolizes the power and influence of the Athenian politician Pericles, who championed its construction. The Parthenon is a Doric temple, which means that it consists of a rectangular floor plan with a series of low steps on every side and a colonnade of Doric columns extending around the periphery of the entire structure. Each entrance has an additional 6 columns in front of it. The larger of the 2 interior rooms housed the cult statue. The smaller room was used as a treasury. It was built to replace 2 earlier temples of Athena on the Acropolis, of which almost no trace remains today, stood south of the Parthenon, between the Parthenon and the Erechteum. The other, which was still being built at the time of the Parisian sack in 480, was on the same spot as the Parthenon. We know the name of the architect and of the sculptors who made the massive cult statue of the goddess there, but that's about all we know. The 3 main types of columns used in Greek temples and other public buildings are Doric, Ionic, and, Doric, Ionic, and Corinthian. Okay. Now here's a look at those columns. The truest and most basic difference among the orders has to do with proportion. Doric columns, the ones on the left, for example, being thicker and shorter. Ionic columns, taller and slimmer, and those are the ones in the center. Corinthian is on the right-hand side. As a shortcut, the orders may be distinguished most easily by their capitals, the tops of the column. So these pictures show the tops of the column so you can see the difference. The Doric capital has the simplest design, the Ionic has the curlicues, and the Corinthian has the leaves. Now, the Parthenon was also known for its sculptures. There's several that are famous: an Athenian statue, a 3 goddess statue, and several friezes. The relief sculptures at the west end of the temple depicted the contest between Poseidon and Athena for the right to be the patron deity of Athens. And if you've seen Percy and the Olympians, the movie, they talk at some point, or at least they do in the book, they talk at some point about the reason why Annabeth and Percy shouldn't get along is because their parents didn't, Athena and Poseidon. And the reason they didn't get along is because they both gave gifts to the city of Athens, and Athens chose their patron deity. Well, the gift of the olive tree was preferred over Poseidon's spring, so Athena became the deity of Athens, and Poseidon was evidently upset, according to the stories. Now, the eastern group of sculptures showed the birth of Athena, which is the story that Athena sprung from Zeus's head. And the sculpture suffered badly when the Parthenon was hit by a in 1687, and the powder magazine inside exploded. This reclining god on this slide in front of you is probably Dionysius from the east pediment, and it gives us some sense of the quality of the sculpture. You can see that it is injured quite a bit. Now, Greek art and sculpture has a profound effect throughout the ages. Many of the styles have been reproduced and copied by some of what modern audiences would say would class as the finest artists to have ever lived. For instance, Michelangelo. Western art and sculpture derived from Roman art while in the East, and Alexander the Great's conquest gave birth to Greco-Buddhist art, which has had an influence as far as Japan, and all of this stemmed from ancient Greek art. Some of that art was the other Acropolis buildings. Architecture is super famous and super influential. All of this art led to a belief in humanism, and the belief posited by Protagoras, is that man is the measure of all things. And so man is what became the subject of a lot of art. So there was a move from the gods to man. And there was also this idea of secular humanism, and that means non-religious. So again, a move from gods to man. Now the classical style in Greek art is considered representing the human figure in motion, and it's considered a turning point for Greek sculptures. And we're going to talk about that some more in just a minute. Okay, so here's some of the famous sculptures listed on the screen right now, and we'll have some images in just a minute. So geometric art dates from about 900 to 700 BCE and was a dramatic transformation for the Greek city-state polis and the Greek alphabet. Sculptures and carvings began to be made representing each city-state's heroes and past legends, including animals and humans. The growth of new trade routes and the opportunities for colonization permitted Greek art to flourish and to expand and to conquer the world, so to say. So large temples and sanctuaries were built, and we've talked about those. They were built in tribute to the gods and were furnished with precious statues and arts. Armed warriors, chariots, and horses are the most familiar symbols of the geometric period. But then with the newly established trade routes, we begin to see a move to the naturalistic style. And again, we've talked about that briefly. But then there's a move that happened gradually where many Greek artists began to assimilate ideas from the Eastern counterparts. And they started to use animals and composition beasts such as griffins, which are part bird, part lion, and sphinxes, part woman, part winged lion, and sirens, part woman, part bird. Competition between Greeks throughout the Greek mainland and colonies began to emerge to see who had produced the greatest and most innovative marvels. There was after that then this move that we just mentioned toward representing humans and the human form. And in the last chapter we talked about the Kuros, the statues of the young male figure, and the Kori, the statues of the maiden. Those new statues showed young humans naked and always with a smile on their face. The aim was to try to show perfection in form. But now, in this classical stage, we move to creating a golden age. And this is from the time Athens rose to prominence in Greek expansion right up until the death of Alexander the Great. The classical age could be seen as a turning point and produced some of the most exquisite sculptures known today. It was during this age that sculptors had mastered marble and began creating statues that showed joyous freedom of movement and expression. Our first example is Discobulus, and this shows the freedom of movement, the discus thrower. It's one of the most famous classical Greek statues from this period. It's also the first time human anatomy was deemed worthy of being portrayed in a statue, for it ever immortalized in stone and bronze. Portraying people in a static and stiff position had now been replaced with a more modern snapshot of three-dimensional movements so that people could admire the human body for its aesthetic values. It was the first time that humans could be almost godlike, which meant that the human body became the subject of study for the first time. In ancient Greece, a long intellectual evolution had reached its logical conclusion during the classical era when man as a living organism on this planet acquired the importance it deserved, and gods became human through marble and bronze. With the rise of democracy and philosophy, it changed the face of art literally. In the classical period, all the Greek statues from this time showed a lack of expression, whereas the depiction of barbarians shows a dramatic facial expression. This was because the Greeks believed that suppression of the emotions was a noble characteristic of civilized men, while the public display of human emotion was a sign of barbarism. Temples and sanctuaries cried out for more lavish monumental statues, bringing the legends and gods to life, such as the famous motifs from the Parthenon. And statues at funerals also evolved from rigid, unhuman-like statues of the past to new modern pieces that showed more detail and family-oriented scenes. All right. This Hellenistic style was characterized by the emotionally charged realism of late Greek sculpture. Again, they were influenced by Alexander the Great from Persia and Egypt, and individuality. The Charioteer of Delphi is an example of Hellenistic era art, and we will return to these kinds of examples in the next chapter, where we focus more on this next evolution of sculpture in Greece.